Sure, I'll keep in. Good morning, everyone. Just to say, first of all, just what a privilege it is for me to join you in this beautiful event. It's just been such a blessing for me already to be here yesterday. So just thank you again for inviting me. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, I spent the 30 minutes yesterday just explaining a little bit about the beginnings of this work of Mary's Meals, this beautiful work that's grown around the world in such an incredible way. And really yesterday I spoke about the early days of the mission and explained how this work wasn't something that I ever planned. Certainly isn't a work that I'm qualified to do, and it's still a mystery to me why God chose me to do this work. But I'm very grateful that He did, and very grateful that He continues to send so many wonderful co-workers to join this mission every day all over the world, and here in Ireland in a very special way. So this morning I would really just like to take up the story from where I left it off yesterday. So I'd explained about the first 10 years of our work in many different countries, and that work I talked about yesterday, it was all done in the name of Scottish International Relief. It was before the birth of Mary's Meals itself. So Mary's Meals itself was born in 2002. That was a year of terrible famine across southern Africa, especially in Malawi, where millions of people were facing starvation. And we began working in that country for the very first time. We were working there with some amazing people whose lives had also been changed in Medjugorje many years before, and these wonderful people were very involved in reaching out to those who were facing starvation. So we began working with them, and we chose particular villages that year in which the people were literally eating the roots of trees and the leaves of trees to survive. And we said to the people in those villages, we'll stay with you until your next harvest. We'll bring enough food during that time so that you can stay in your village and you can keep working in your fields for your next harvest. And that's so important at times of famine like that. So often the people leave their homes, leave their farms in the search of food in the cities, and when they do that, they're not there to plant their crops and tend their fields, and that way of life can break down very quickly. So that was a beautiful project in itself, a very simple project using people's donations to buy food in the cities and to take it into those villages. But during the course of that work in one of those villages, something incredible happened to me that led to the birth of Mary's Meals. One morning, the local parish priest there that I was staying with said to me, I'm going out to visit a family. The mother of the family is very sick. Would you like to come with me? And so I said yes. And on the way to their home, he explained that the father of the family had died some time before, and now the mother was dying, which was why he was going to visit. And when we entered their home, which was just a small two-room mud brick home, Emma, the mother of the family, was lying on her mud floor, and she was surrounded by her 6 children, and she was in agony. She didn't even have the possibility of a basic painkiller, let alone drugs to treat HIV/AIDS, which is what she was suffering from. And we began talking to Emma, and she said to us, you know, there's nothing left for me now except to pray that somebody will look after my children when I'm gone. And she was really panicking about that, because all of the adults in that village were already caring for orphan children, because so many people were dying at that time. And then I began talking to her oldest child sitting beside her. He was called Edward, and Edward was about 14 years of age. And at one point in the conversation, I asked Edward, maybe like any of us would when we meet a young person for the first time, I said to Edward, what are your hopes? What are your ambitions? And he looked at me and he said, I'd like to have enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day. And that was it. That was all of his ambition at 14 years of age. And that plight that Edward found himself in was something that I encountered over and over again in the years before that. So many times I'd met children who weren't in school because they were hungry, because they were working, because they were begging, because they were just doing whatever they needed to do to put the next meal on the table. And therefore they were missing out on school and the opportunity of education, and their only possible ladder out of poverty. So millions of children are like Edward today in the world. About 66 million children today missing school because of hunger and caught in that horrible cycle of poverty. And those words that Edward spoke to me that day really made me think about that in a new way, and made some of us think about that link between food and education. And it was through that this work of Mary's Meals was born. We began Mary's Meals later that same year in Malawi, just realizing that by simply providing one good meal every day in a place of education, we could meet the immediate need of a hungry child like Edward, but at the same time we could tackle the underlying cause of poverty by enabling them to come to school and to gain that education. And I think the way we began Mary's Meals at the end of that famine year in Malawi was really important. I think three very important things. The first being that all the years of work before that in Bosnia and Liberia and Romania and Latin America had taught us a lot of things, but especially it had taught us that if projects were going to work, they had to be owned first of all by the local community more than by us. And so we organized public meetings in Malawi, and we said to the people who came, look, we've got this idea that we would like to start serving meals in your school. But we'll only do that if you believe in this idea. And more than that, we'll only do this if you're willing to volunteer your time to cook and serve the meals every day. And immediately the people said, yes, this is what we want for our children. This is what they need. And they began organizing rotas to take turns to volunteer. And the second thing that was very important from the beginning was that as much as possible, we wanted to buy food locally, to support the local economy, to help the local farmer. So in Malawi, that meant we chose a dish called lakuni pala. It's a porridge, really, not like our porridge in Scotland, but made of the maize they grow in Malawi with some added soya, with lots of soya and added sugar and vitamins and minerals. Very nutritious meal, but all available locally. And then the third thing at the beginning, I think the most important, and probably the main reason why it's grown in this miraculous way around the world. We felt especially at this point that this work belonged to our Blessed Mother, and thus we gave it the name Mary's Meals, and we gave it to her, and we asked her to show us how she would have us do this work, how we could do this work in a way that would please her, how we could do this work in a way that would always point to her son, Jesus. And then we began, just very small, one school in Malawi to about 200 children. And almost immediately when we began serving those first meals, we could see that this wasn't just a nice idea. it was something that was really going to work, because almost immediately children who'd never been to school before began coming because of that promise of a meal. And then children who used to come just some days because they were so often sick with hunger began coming every day. And then over a longer period of time, the teachers began telling us about this very, very dramatic improvement in academic performance, how children were passing their exams because they could concentrate and learn. Because in a country like Malawi, almost no children would ever eat anything before school in the morning. So before Mary's Meals, children were expected to go to school and spend the school day without eating anything at all. So we could see that this worked. And then before long, the next village came to us and said, can we have Mary's Meals as well, please? And we said yes, and then so it went on. And it's just gone on and on and on like that in Malawi until this day. You know, today we're feeding nearly 1 million children just in Malawi every school day. It's an incredible thing. Praise God. God is so good. That's about 30% of the children in Malawi of primary school age. And every school we go into, we see the same things happen. Children begin coming who never came to school before. It's a beautiful, practical, motherly work of love. And just so many beautiful experiences in those early days working in Malawi. I remember going back in those early years to one of the schools in Malawi where we'd been serving the meals, and when I arrived there, the teachers immediately wanted to introduce me to two brothers in the school. The older brother was called Lazarus, and the younger brother was called Peter, small Peter they called him. And the teachers explained their story. A few weeks before I'd visited, they noticed that the older brother, Lazarus, had begun coming into school late every morning. And that was very unlike him. He'd been a very punctual boy before that. So they investigated a little bit what was happening at home, and they discovered that the boy's mother had died. There was no father at home. And so Lazarus, at 11 years old, became the head of the household, trying his best to look after his little brother, small Peter, who was only 3. And quite soon, small Peter became very sick. And he probably just got ill because they didn't have enough food at home. And the older boy, Lazarus, he was benefiting from Mary's Meals in his primary school. He was eating our meal every day. And then he discovered that Mary's Meals, we also provide meals in nurseries and preschool centres, and he learnt that there was one of these about 1 mile away from his home. And so every morning before school, he began carrying his little brother, who was very sick by now, the mile to the under 6 centre, to the nursery. And only when he got him there and he knew that he would be safe and that he would be fed that day, did he carry on to school himself, which is why he was being late every morning. And I was just so moved meeting those boys. You know, Lazarus, what a hero. He just saved his little brother's life, you know, and it reminded me again that this work of Mary's Meals is literally saving children's lives every day like that. And it also reminded me, you know, that so many of the real heroes of this work are people like Lazarus or the volunteers in those communities, many of whom are facing every day a struggle to survive, a struggle to feed their own children, and yet they're choosing to volunteer unpaid to cook and serve meals for the children in their communities. They're giving what they have. Because I think there's a danger sometimes in doing this kind of work where we start to think those of us in the wealthier countries, we're the ones that are doing all the giving, and people maybe in Africa are just waiting passively for our help. And it's not like that at all, Mary's Meals. It's all of us walking together with the same goal, that the hungry child might be fed every day. And we're all equally part of that, whether we're the people who give the donations to buy the food, whether we're the people who volunteer here in Ireland to give talks, or whether we're the people in those villages who give up our time to cook that porridge. We're all in this together, and that's a very beautiful thing about Mary's Meals, that sense of a global movement that we're all part of. That I think I said yesterday, I just think about that movement now like a series of lots and lots of little acts of love. None of us doing anything spectacular on our own, but when you put all our little efforts together, it's creating this beautiful thing, I think this amazing sign of mercy, God's mercy to the world. So I thank God for that. When we could see that Mary's Meals was working so well in Malawi, we began to develop this kind of vision or this belief that every child in the world might at least be able to receive one good meal every day in their place of education. In this world of plenty, in this world where we produce more than enough food for all of us to eat well. And so to test that, we wanted to start Mary's Meals in other countries to see if it would work in the same way. So quite soon we set up Mary's Meals projects in Liberia. We already knew the people of Liberia. We'd worked there through their terrible war. And so we began setting up Mary's Meals there, just in exactly the same way with local volunteers. And again, we just saw exactly the same results, except even more spectacular, because even more children in Liberia are out of school because of hunger. Today in Liberia, just less than 50% of the children there ever enroll in a school, ever. So when we start serving the meals there, even bigger numbers of some of the schools doubled in size when we began serving the meals. We served the very first meals in Liberia in a leper colony, Masati, a very, very remote and deprived community, just a perfect place for us to begin. And then we began taking Mary's Meals to lots of other countries as well. In Kenya, for example, the far north of Kenya, Turkana, where the people are semi-nomadic, following their animals to water, and really on the edge of survival, a place where there are horribly high rates of child malnutrition. And there we mainly feed children in nurseries. In Haiti, we provide meals in the slums of Port-au-Prince. Particularly, we work in a slum called Cité Soleil, often described as the most violent slum in the world. And 500,000 people there live on what was a rubbish dump. No running water, no sanitation, not even primary health care, a place where the police are afraid to go. It's run completely by armed gangs. We're only allowed to work there, or able to work there, because of this remarkable American priest who's devoted his life to the people of that slum, and who lives there and who's built some schools there. And so we work with him, with Father Tom, to provide the meals in those schools. And those meals, again, take the children off the streets. Many of those children, when they first came with the serving of those meals, were naked, completely naked, no clothing. It's the worst poverty I've ever seen. So today, Father Tom's got uniforms for those kids, and every day they queue up for their porridge at morning break. Well, actually, it's not porridge in Haiti, it's rice and vegetables and fish. So we see that this very, very simple thing we do, the serving of a meal every day, it works, and it just has grown and grown and grown. And people from many parts of the world now coming to us almost every week and asking, can we have Mary's Meals as well, please? In India, Mary's Meals looks a little bit different. There we are working always for the children in so-called Dalit communities. Because of the caste system, they're children who are normally excluded from any kind of formal education. Nearly all of those children work in rubbish dumps every day, looking for things that they can sell for recycling to try and survive. And we say to those children, if you just come away from your work for 3 hours, we'll give you a meal, and we'll begin to teach you how to read and write. And we call those non-formal schools. We just find a safe place. It can be on a railway platform maybe, or under a tree in the village, or we might borrow a room from somebody, and we gather maybe 90 of those children, and then we begin to see them learn. It's beautiful also in India because we work through a missionary society, the Indian Missionary Society, priests and nuns, mainly from the Catholic areas of southern India, working in the north in very difficult circumstances, very often persecuted for their faith. And one of the things they love to do is work with these groups of children. But it's also wonderful to see how it brings different faiths together in India. I remember visiting a project there, and the project was managed by a Catholic nun, and it was taking place in a spare room of a Muslim man in the village, and the teacher was a Hindu lady. So just that one little meal that we served had brought those three great world religions together, which was a very beautiful thing to see. And it's wonderful now in India to see those children, many of them after 4, 5, 6 years, go on into mainstream proper primary schools. For the first time ever, for centuries, those children, those communities have been excluded from school, and now, having begun to learn to read and write, they have the confidence to go to school. And that's one of the really wonderful things about Mary's Meals at this stage, is to be able to go back to some of those communities in which we've been working for a number of years, and to meet young people who are now, who've now left school, who might tell us, you know, without Mary's Meals, I might not be alive. I certainly never would have gone inside the school. And those young people are maybe now in paid employment or in further education or have small businesses. Very often they've become the leaders of change in their communities. For example, in Haiti, there's a young man called Jimmy. He sounds like he's from this part of the world, or Glasgow rather than Haiti, but that's his name. And I first met Jimmy when he was in high school there, eating Mary's Meals, and it was just after the earthquake, actually. And I always remember him because he was such a bright, articulate boy, and I spent a day with him and just got to know him a bit. And all he wanted to talk about was how he wanted to help Haiti escape poverty, escape dependence on aid. Anyway, today Jimmy's become quite famous in Haiti because he's a very gifted singer-songwriter. He writes beautiful songs about his life growing up in Cité Soleil, and when he's not pursuing his music career, he comes back into those schools where those children are coming off the street to learn, and he talks to them about how, and they hero worship him because of his fame as a singer, and he talks to them about how they can escape poverty, how they don't have to join the gangs. It's very hard to escape the gang culture in Cité Soleil. And so he's just doing this amazing job of giving back. Many of the kids that have left the schools now in Cité Soleil come back to volunteer to help cook for the next generation of children. The last couple of years, we've taken Jimmy to the huge youth festival that happens in Medjugorje every August, when about, 50 or 60,000 young people gather from around the world to celebrate their faith. And it was an incredibly moving thing to see Jimmy in front of that crowd, telling them his story about how Mary's Meals changed his life, and singing them his songs. He's like this living witness of what this work is all about. So many young people like that today. In Malawi, a young lady called Veronica, now at university studying finance, and we got to know her when we were making a film a couple of years ago called Generation Hope, about these young people leaving school now. And when we were making the film with her, again, she's just this amazing, articulate, passionate young person talking about how things will change in Malawi. And we discovered while we were working with her that she was actually amongst the first group of 200 children that we fed back in 2002. And she tells us how she was an orphan. She grew up being looked after by her 2 older sisters. She would tell us how sometimes she went for a whole week at home without eating. They just had no food in the house. And again talks about how Mary's Meals transformed her life. So many witnesses of hope that encourage us just to go on. Because in every one of those countries we're working in today, there are schools waiting, communities waiting, where the people are ready to volunteer to begin serving the meals, and they're waiting for us to come back to say we've raised the funds and we can begin. And that's why we're so grateful to so many of you who are joining this mission and supporting this work in so many different ways, so that we can go back and say yes to some of those communities. It's incredible to think today that in this world of plenty, probably about 18,000 children just today will die of hunger-related causes. In this world where there's more than enough food for all of us. And yet, at the same time, on average, it costs us only €15.60 to feed a child for an entire school year. And yet children are starving. I know when we began this work, and sometimes we would stand up and talk about our vision that every child in this world might at least be able to eat one meal every day. People looked at us a little bit like that we'd lost the plot to have a vision like that, so grand, so ambitious. I honestly think more than ever that it's much more crazy that any child of God would go a day without eating, that any child in this world would be out of school because of hunger. And so we go on. And always we go on mindful that this work we do in the work of our Blessed Mother. And that's not a small thing to do the work in her name. It feels like a very special responsibility to do this work always in a way that honours her. And so often in our work, in my own travels and adventures over the years, she's reminded me in lots of different ways that she's with us. I remember one time, especially in 2011, there was a terrible famine in Somalia, worst famine the world's seen in many, many years. And to begin with, we didn't think we would be able to help in Somalia because we normally only respond to emergencies if they happen in a country where we're already working. And so to begin with, we said we're not going to be able to help in Somalia. And then I was talking to some good friends of mine in Malawi. They're Muslims and they're very, very charitable people. They help us in Malawi. They gift us water wells and things like that we need to make the project work in Malawi. They approached me in 2011 and said, Magnus, we are trying to help the people of Somalia, and we have a setup in Mogadishu, in the capital there, that allows us to feed many starving people, but we really need help to get food for them. We can fly it in. And so we made an appeal, and as always, people were so generous donating money so we could buy food for the starving people of Somalia. And so we bought that food in Malawi, and these Muslim friends of mine flew it up to Mogadishu. And just before they flew the first consignment of food, they said, Magnus, you're coming with us to Somalia, aren't you, in the plane? And I wasn't really expecting that, because at that time, Mogadishu was described as the most dangerous city on earth, and it was very difficult for outside organizations to go in there. And so I talked to my wife about it, and as always, she prayed about it, and as always was supportive of. She was saying, I think you should really go, because so many people have given. We want to be able to tell them that the food actually arrived, because there was lots of publicity at that time that it was impossible to work in Somalia. So I went, and I was very scared. I was reading about the situation on the way in and how many tragic things had happened with journalists and aid workers in the days before this. And we arrived, and I didn't feel any better because just about everyone on the pavements driving through the city had machine guns, and the war at that time in Somalia was very messy. There was no clear front line. And anyway, I was there with these Muslim friends. Most of them were doctors who were going there to volunteer. And we arrived at our accommodation, this safe house for the night, and we were being led through the courtyard to where we were going to sleep. And as this young Somali man led us through the courtyard, there was this enormous explosion very close by, and I jumped, I started, and this young Somali man turned round to me and talked to me maybe like I was about 5 years old, and he said, don't worry, it was just a bomb. And it really didn't make me feel any better. And so anyway, we went into where we were going to stay the night, and there was about 20 of us sleeping in this one room. And I remember I woke up in the morning and found myself alone in the room. All my travelling companions were outside on their prayer mats saying their morning prayers as good devout Muslims. And I was left inside in my own saying my morning rosary. And I remember thinking I'd never felt so far away from home. And I suddenly realized why I thought I felt so far away from home and so scared. It was all the other travels I'd done over the years. I'd always been with people that shared my own faith. Normally I'd been with priests or different parts of the church, going to Mass and having people to pray with. And I'd read on the way into Somalia that at that time there was no priests left in Somalia. There was no Mass being celebrated, no church. And it really made me just suddenly stop and realize how much I took for granted with the gift of the sacraments, the gift of this church to which we belong, you know, and suddenly thought with absolute horror what this world would be like without those things, without our church. And then as I was praying my rosary, I suddenly realized it was the 8th of September, Our Lady's birthday. And I began to think, you know, what could be more beautiful on Our Lady's birthday to give her this gift of food for the children in Malawi, of Somalia. And I began to feel better. I really began to feel she was with me there. And I always remember later that day we were out in the camps, terrible places, where we were meeting mothers who'd walked, some of them nearly 100 miles to Mogadishu looking for food, some of them who'd seen their own children die on the journey of hunger. And then to see that day our food, our bags of Mary's Meals food with Mary's Meals written on it, our Blessed Mother's name, and this real sense that she was there feeding our children. It was a very special thing for me. It was a very deep reminder that this work really does belong to her. And I would just finish by saying that, you know, this celebration here of God's mercy, for me, I just feel for those of us that want to try and learn to be better at being God's mercy in the world, better at trusting in His mercy. I don't think we can do any better than looking to our Blessed Mother and the perfect example of how to trust God's mercy, to live God's mercy, you know, whether it be her actions at the wedding feast in Cana, or maybe especially when she stood at the bottom of the cross as her son died for us. She shows us how to trust God's mercy. So thank you so much for listening to me this weekend. I need to go fairly soon, but I'm going to be at the stall during the break. We ran out of my book yesterday. So many of you wanted to buy it, but if you do want it, please come to our stand and we'll take a note of your details and send you one. And there's lots of other information there too. So thank you so much. Thank you all of you who are helping this mission. God bless.